Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Venezuela earthquake toll rises to 235 as rescuers race to find survivors under the rubble. Tehran strikes ship into the Strait of Hormuz as countries try to reopen the oil route. And the UK records its hottest ever June day as health emergencies surge in Europe. Venezuela is facing a major disaster after back-to-back earthquakes struck just west of the capital, killing at least 235 people and injuring 1,500, with the death toll likely to rise. Rescue teams have been working around the clock in search for survivors. The earthquake has reduced dozens of buildings to rubble, and now many countries around the world have pledged to assist the South American country. Here's more on this report.
Rescue teams in Venezuela are searching for survivors after a powerful pair of earthquakes left more than 200 people trapped beneath collapsed buildings, according to officials. Emergency crews worked through rubble in Caracas and nearby regions on Thursday, as thousands remained missing and families waited for news. The quakes, measuring magnitudes 7.2 and 7.5, struck west of the capital on Wednesday evening, with the second hitting less than a minute after the first, according to the US Geological Survey.
Buildings started to crack and things began falling apart everywhere. Everyone was frightened and nervous. It was the first time this had happened. I am in my apartment upstairs. Everything is destroyed. Everything is broken. Everything is cracked. I had to sleep in my son's car because we can't go back upstairs. My son, my son-in-law, my grandson and I slept in the car. We spent the night here and are still here because we can't go back up. We don't know what might happen if it happens again.
More than 1,500 people have been injured, with thousands still unaccounted for. Rescue workers are continuing to clear debris and reach survivors believed to be trapped under collapsed buildings. Entire neighborhoods in Caracas, La Guaira, and surrounding areas have been destroyed, forcing mass evacuations and leaving many homeless. International aid is being mobilized, with the United States deploying search and rescue teams and medical support. The United Nations is coordinating the global response, while Colombia, Mexico, Spain, Cuba, and Panama are sending teams and supplies. The European Union, China, Iran, and the Vatican have also pledged assistance. The US Secretary of State said rescue operations are underway, and a clearer assessment of the damage is expected within 48 hours.
We're already deploying search and rescue teams from Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles. There'll be some others we'll add. That's their most immediate need right now, is search and rescue efforts. They have a bunch of collapsed buildings, and so they'll need a lot of help in terms of digging through that. The airport there is badly damaged, so we'll have to rely on the Department of War to deploy assets there. And then we're also helping them with some overhead imagery, especially in coastal areas where they don't have full visibility over what the damage has been and what the impact has been. Those are the acute, like short-term needs over the next 48 to 72 hours, because in search and rescue, you're trying to get to people while you can still save their lives. They're buried under rubble.
Search and rescue operations continue as crews race against time to find survivors.
Alongside this, Starlink, the satellite internet unit of Elon Musk's SpaceX company, said it will provide free services to its users in Venezuela for a month after 2 earthquakes hit the South American nation, damaging power and telecommunications infrastructure. According to Starlink, existing active customers in impacted areas will automatically receive a credit on their accounts. The customers who previously cancelled their service will also receive credits, allowing them to reactivate their connections. The company also said customers whose Starlink equipment was damaged by the earthquakes can request a free replacement kit. Now, staying with the top story, we take a look at the stories that are shaping the day across the globe. And as you can imagine, this Venezuela earthquake is all over a number of news outlets. So we're going to stick with the BBC and just kind of go through it because there's so many pictures to show, and also a map as well of what has taken place over the course of the last day or so. Now, we know that the death toll from these back-to-back earthquakes has risen to around 235 people. And as you can see coming up on the screen, this is exactly where it took place. Near Caracas is where the epicenter of the two earthquakes happened, which is around about 7.5 impact that it had on this South American country. Now, after two strong earthquakes struck Venezuela within seconds of each other, having caused damage to homes and buildings in several parts of the country. Now, when this took place, the first earthquake was with a magnitude of 7.2, which struck on Wednesday evening, so around 6:04 local time, which is in the morning on Wednesday, 1:04 Baku time. And in the town of the west of the capital, Caracas, the second 7.5 magnitude quake hit in a similar location just 38 seconds later, making the destruction even more severe. Now, if we just go to this video now, which you can just see exactly the chaos that was brought up because of this, because rescuers are now searching through rubble in a rush to save lives because of the earthquake impact, especially because they were two back to back. Now, the video that we're going to now go to, this one shows just exactly the mayhem as well. This was at a local airport first in the country, and then we can just go through a number of things that took place there as many were rushing to safety. Now, many more people are feared dead, with others left homeless or too afraid to stay in damaged, unsafe buildings, sleeping in streets after the disaster took place. And it was also, just to add there, it was a national holiday in Venezuela, which actually meant that more people were staying at home than normal on a weekday, and a lot of due to that, buildings collapsed where more people would have been at home and not necessarily in office buildings. So now this video that you can now see on your screen kind of shows exactly the extremity of what took place on Wednesday evening, Thursday morning in Baku time, and this is the airport that was shaking there. Then we go to another clip of some resident's house, and they're trying to get their mother out. This is in Caracas, so this is the capital in Venezuela as well, of what's going on. And then you go outside and you can see a number of buildings that have collapsed on the street, people trying to contact their loved ones and family members after feeling this two seismic earthquakes happened back to back of each other. I believe it was 30 seconds of each other, of the first one and of the second one, and then those just waiting outside assessing the damage. And as I mentioned, rescue workers as well going there to make sure what was to see what was going on. Delcy Rodriguez, who was the acting president in Venezuela, also addressed the nation in regards to that. Now, if we just go to our next it's the same headline, but next couple of pictures, we're just going to scroll through it so you can just see exactly, it kind of sums up what has been taking place over the last 24 hours. Now, several countries have pledged to help the rescue efforts and provide humanitarian aid, with the US in particular promising $150 million in aid, plus Canada pledged $3.5 million. You have other countries, Chile, Brazil, Mexico, China, Iran, all saying that they're going to help with the disaster that's taken place because of the earthquakes in Venezuela. And reports say around 250 buildings have been damaged or lost, mostly in the La Guaira area, and rescue teams are racing to dig out people trapped alive beneath the rubble of collapsed buildings. And what you're seeing here is people now deciding to spend their time outside, sleeping in the open air, so that they don't fear of a building that they're in being unfortunately being collapsed on them because of tremors that can take place. And we do know that the death toll is likely to rise as more teams go out to try and rescue those who might still be under the rubble. As you can see here from this picture, you've got people still trying to gather, rescue teams, search and rescue teams out there trying to see whether or not they can find any survivors from the two earthquakes as well. Well, we will have some more information later on in the program about this disaster that's taking place in Venezuela. But as you can see, it's a big operation because of the size of the earthquakes and the fact that it was two, not just one, that hit the South American country. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on the Guardian website. And that's in relation to what's been happening throughout the whole of this week, because Europe has been hit by a tremendous heat wave that has caused a number of people to feel very hot. Not only that, people have died because they've had to seek relief in certain places. So let's go to the Guardian website where it shows what's been taking place there, because the UK, Switzerland record hottest ever June day as health emergencies surge through Europe. Now, on Thursday, temperatures were very high, and a toddler in France also died due to the heat because it was trapped in a family car. Now, the UK's new provisional high of 36.4 Celsius was recorded in Somerset and surpassed Wednesday's June record of 36.1 Celsius in Hampshire. Now, in Switzerland, the National Weather Agency said temperatures had exceeded 37 Celsius for the first time in June, breaking a record set in 1947. Now, earlier on Thursday, the Met Office, which is the UK's Weather and Climate Service, said a sweltering night in Cardiff broke another heat record for the country. Now, the scorching temperatures has stretched across much of Western Europe, with at least 101 million people expected to experience temperatures of about 35 Celsius. And in France, there were 3/4 of the country remained under an extreme heat alert. The National Weather Agency registered the hottest night since records began in 1947, as overnight temperatures from Wednesday to Thursday broke a record set earlier that week. And in France, at least 40 people, many of them are young people, had drowned while swimming in unsupervised areas. So there is a call out to make sure people are safe if they are heading into open waters to cool down, just because of the safety risks attached to that if there is no one there to help or provide assistance if they do run into trouble. Now, French authorities have announced public alcohol consumption and in sales are banned in Paris for a period of time in a bid to ease pressure on the capital's hospitals during the heat wave. And heat wave conditions that have left Spain, UK and France in sweltering for days. And this map just shows exactly what that looks like, because as you can see, red, this is the extreme alert, showing red is the highest, reaching the 30+ mark Celsius. We got that in the UK and also spreading to different parts of Europe. And also the orange, still very hot, where Spain, Portugal, Italy, and other parts of Western Europe. Now, that is actually going to seem to travel more across to Eastern Europe as well, because Germany have also forecasted, as well as the Czech Republic, a warning of extreme conditions taking place. And temperatures in Germany could hit 40 Celsius across the country on Friday. And Germany's national rail operator is actually allowing passengers to cancel trips because of the heat and the damage that it does to its railway tracks, because the temperature is so high. So we will later on have a guest to discuss exactly what is taking place and why Europe is under this extreme heat pressure and the climate changes that people are witnessing as they move from each day to day. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the New York Times website, and that's in relation to what's been going on with Trump. So the Supreme Court expands Trump's power over immigration. Now, what does this mean? So the Supreme Court has ruled that the Trump administration can strip protected status from hundreds of thousands of Haitian and Syrian migrants, which has allowed them to stay in the US for years. Now, the ruling overturned decisions by federal judges that had blocked the administration from terminating temporary protected status, which is TPS for short, and that's for 350,000 people from Haiti and 6,100 from Syria. So that exactly what the ruling is there. Their protected status is now being lifted. So, and what TPS actually means is that it's granted to individuals whose home countries are unable to accommodate them, whether or not it's due to war or natural disasters. Now, Donald Trump has long pushed to terminate the program as part of his efforts to restrict immigration, and TPS was actually created in Congress with a bipartisan support in 1990 to provide temporary legal status to people whose homes, as I mentioned, deemed unsafe because of war, natural disasters or other crisis. But the CEO and founder of Public Rights Project said today's decision puts hundreds of thousands of people at risk. So that is the latest on that. Now let's move over to our last headline this morning, and that's on the Washington Post in relation to Apple. Now this has been going on. We did get some hints that Apple was going to increase their prices, but now it's actually taken place because Apple increases prices for Mac and iPads, blaming a shortage of memory chips. So Apple has increased its price of MacBooks and iPads worldwide due to the rising memory and storage chip costs. Now, the iPhone maker has hiked the prices of some laptops and tablets by almost 20%, saying that the electronics industry is facing an unprecedented challenge due to an extraordinary surge in demand for chips to power AI data centers. Not long after that announcement, Xbox also decided to significantly rise their price of their popular gaming console for the second time in less than a year due to the components crisis is what they're calling it. Now, the Microsoft-owned company said that on Thursday, the price of its basic console will go up by $100 to $499, while the price of a console with more memory will go from $150 to $749. Now, these prices will come into effect in August for Microsoft for the Xbox, whereas Apple, that has also taken effect. That increase has already taken effect across the globe. Now, the company, which is Microsoft, said that they hoped the price increase would not be necessary, but blamed the rising cost of console storage and memory for needing to raise prices up, which is the reasons for that, as well as hardware costs. But as you can see, when you next go to the store, this is what you might find yourself having to reach into your pockets and dig a little bit more deeper to get exactly what you would like, whether or not that's an iPad, a laptop, or anything like that. But the iPhone isn't untouched yet. That has not gone up in price. However, everything else has, as well as Xbox, if you are a fan of Microsoft's Xbox console. Okay, well, that's the press roundup for this morning and your headlines. Now we'll head to a short break, and when I return, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. And we head first over to the Middle East because maritime tensions are escalating in the Gulf following an attack on a commercial vessel near the Strait of Hormuz. The incident has prompted the suspension of an international escort operation, raising fresh concerns over the security of one of the world's busiest shipping routes.
The UN International Maritime Organization paused its operation to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday, following an attack on a vessel in the Gulf of Oman. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre had earlier said a cargo vessel was hit by an unknown projectile off Oman, causing damage to the ship's bridge. No casualties or environmental damage were reported. Reuters sources identified the ship as the Singapore-flagged Ever Lovely, while a security source said it was likely targeted by a drone. Two US officials also told Reuters that Iran had fired on the ship, while Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority said vessels outside routes it has set will not be guaranteed safe passage. Secretary-General Arsenio Dominguez said to ensure coordinated approach and navigational safety, the IMO evacuation plan will be paused until further notice. The decision came hours after the IMO and Oman announced an evacuation plan for more than 11,000 seafarers stranded in the region amid heightened tensions and maritime security concerns. The IMO was helping to get hundreds of stranded ships and thousands of seafarers out of the strait, where they had been stranded for months since the start of the war in late February. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington and its Gulf allies are opposed to any Iranian fees or restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz, following a meeting with Gulf Cooperation Council countries in Bahrain.
The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has sought to reassure the Gulf states over their security concerns when it comes to their agreement with Iran. Now let's go to our Washington correspondent who has more.
U.S. Gulf allies have been skeptical about the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. Their list of worries is long. Rubio says the U.S. wants a deal with Iran, but it won't do so at any price, meaning a permanent deal won't be at the expense of its Gulf allies. Now, Rubio says any tolls or fees in the Strait of Hormuz will never be accepted as terms of a deal. Rubio says that Oman has now told other Gulf countries it does not support tolls. These comments come after Oman and Iran just a few days ago had said that they were looking to jointly administer the strait. Then there's the issue of Iran's ballistic missiles. Arab countries in the Gulf see it as an immediate threat, something the MOU does not address. So many Gulf countries fearing that a $300 billion fund for Iran could be used to buy more missiles and drones. Rubio says the $300 billion reconstruction fund was not discussed, but he told reporters the U.S. would not do anything that undermines its long-standing allies in the region. Now, all of the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait are crucial to the U.S. They have offered logistical support to the U.S. military during the war, even as they came under attack by Iranian airstrikes. That's why Rubio's trip was key here in making sure that the US's Middle East partners stay on board. Them backing off or rethinking their security relationship with the US would be a huge setback for Washington. In a joint statement by the US and the Gulf Cooperation Council, they said that a lasting peace would mean addressing Iran's ballistic missiles, drones, and support for proxy groups. Alistair D'Souza for A News in Washington, D.C.
Now, Israel and Lebanon have rejected claims that Israeli forces withdrew from parts of southern Lebanon, despite a U.S. official saying troops had pulled back from sections of a buffer zone. The remarks come in the middle of U.S.-mediated talks on a phased arrangement that could see territory in the south handed over to Lebanese army. A U.S. Senate Department official described the reported move as a good faith step, saying Lebanese forces should move in to secure the area and dismantle militant infrastructure. But Israeli officials denied any withdrawal. Positions in the buffer zone remained unchanged. Staying on this topic, France and Italy will spearhead a new multinational coalition to support Lebanon after the UN peacekeeping mission ends later this year. Speaking after talks in Antibes, President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced the joint initiative is designed to bolster Lebanese sovereignty and directly strengthen the country's armed forces. The leaders also proposed convening an international transition conference coordinated with the European Union and the United Nations. UK King Charles III will break nearly 2 centuries of royal tradition by refusing to live at Buckingham Palace after its 10-year refurbishment finishes next year. Royal officials confirmed the landmark will no longer serve as the monarch's primary residence amid calls for financial transparency. Officials also disclosed for the first time that the king paid over $17 million in taxes last year, placing him among Britain's top 100 taxpayers. Staying on the UK, it has been gripped by a severe heat wave as temperatures hit breaking record and breaking levels. The extreme heat is disrupting hospitals, schools and emergency services, while red weather warnings remain in place. Authorities warn of ongoing risks to safety and health. Our correspondent Zainab Farizadeh has more.
The UK has recorded its hottest June day on record, with temperatures reaching 36.4 degrees in Somerset, as a heat wave continues to affect millions across England and Wales. It is the second consecutive day the June temperature record has been broken after 36.1 degrees was recorded in Hampshire on Tuesday. The extreme conditions are placing increasing pressure on public services. At least 6 NHS trusts in England have declared critical incidents with heat affecting IT systems, cancer treatment equipment, laboratory testing and medical scanners. The London Ambulance Service says it received almost 8,000 calls on Wednesday, including 642 life-threatening emergencies, with crews attending nearly 3,600 patients. Red weather warnings for extreme heat remain in place until Friday evening. The Met Office warns the conditions could have widespread impacts on health and pose a risk to life. The heatwave is also disrupting education, with around 2,400 schools in England and Wales experiencing closures or disruption this week. Water supplies are also under pressure. South East Water has imposed a housepipe ban across Kent, affecting around 850,000 customers as demand reached record levels. The company says water is being used faster than it can be treated and refilled, and that supplies must be protected for essential use such as drinking, cooking and hygiene. Forecasters say temperatures will remain exceptionally high until Friday before cooler conditions arrive over the weekend. Zena Farisada, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Staying on this heat wave, Paris has banned public alcohol consumption and takeaway sales to relieve emergency rooms overwhelmed by a record heat wave. The weekend restrictions target street drinking and retail sales as capital hospitals hit a critical saturation point. Officials ordered the emergency clampdown after the Paris Fire Brigade reported a doubling of emergency calls, surging past 2,500 operations in a single day. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says tens of billions of dollars in new defence-related contracts are expected to be announced at the alliance's upcoming summit in Ankara in July. Speaking at the Atlantic Council, Rutte said the deals would mark a significant boost to NATO defence cooperation.
Spurred by President Trump's leadership, we see household names like Lockheed, RTX, Northrop Grumman, Boeing and General Dynamics massively ramping up their production to meet this moment. We also see newer firms like Anduril, Palantir and Divergent Technologies innovating on tech and production methods at pace and with purpose. That is revolution. Bottom line, the prospects are plentiful. And in Ankara we will provide a platform to showcase how we are seizing the opportunities and making this revolution a reality. We will announce tens of billions of dollars of new contracts. And when our industries from Arlington to Ankara combine their strengths and step up supply, the result is not only improved security. We are in the early stages of a defense industrial revolution that will help grow our economies and support hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he has authorized a 40-day campaign of strikes deep inside Russia aimed at increasing pressure on Moscow to end the war. Moscow came under an overnight drone attack, with the city's mayor saying Russian air defenses shot down at least 39 Ukrainian drones approaching the capital. Ukraine also reportedly struck 2 oil refineries in Ufa and an oil depot in Russia's Krasnodar region, with local officials confirming the depot was hit. The attacks also triggered power outages in Russian-occupied Crimea and parts of the Kherson region. As the war in Ukraine continues, the pressure on emergency services remains severe. Beyond the battlefield, civilians, medics and rescue workers still depend on outside support to keep basic response systems running. Across Ukraine, emergency teams are working under extraordinary pressure. Ambulances, fire crews and medical units are often operating close to damaged infrastructure, repeated attacks and stretched local resources. Much of that support comes through a network of charities, volunteers and local partners across Europe. Tensions are simmering between two East European neighbours, Belarus and Ukraine, after Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said he did not want his country to be drawn into war. He warned that any involvement would change the nature of the conflict. Here's more on this.
We do not need to get involved in a war, so there is no need to push us toward it or suggest that Boris Vyacheslavovic is orchestrating a process to drag us into a war. Listen, the President of Russia and I have discussed this issue 1,000 times.
Moving over to East Asia, and South Korea will rapidly expand its drone fleet and train 500,000 drone warriors to counter growing threats from North Korea. The Defense Ministry announced plans to deploy over 100,000 domestically produced AI-backed unmanned systems across frontline units by 2029. The offset is shrinking population. Seoul is transforming low-cost drones into standard frontline weapons while deploying advanced laser and microwave counter-drone defense systems. Now to Central Africa, and the number of confirmed Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo has risen to 1,155, including 304 deaths, according to government data released on Thursday. Health officials reported 37 new infections and 5 additional deaths over the past 24 hours. They intensified epidemiological and laboratory surveillance has improved the early detection of cases, but also highlights the continued spread of the virus through communities, with transmission increasing week by week. Two years after anti-government protests shook Kenya, the anniversary has brought renewed calls for accountability and a major security operation across the capital. Authorities say they are protecting public order, while demonstrators insist they are honouring those killed during the 2024 unrest.
A heavy police presence has been deployed across Nairobi as Kenya marks the second anniversary of the anti-government protests that erupted on June 25th, 2024. Officers in anti-riot gear, supported by armored vehicles and water cannon trucks, were stationed at key intersections, government buildings, and major roads. Traffic was diverted in several areas, while many businesses remained closed and parts of the city center were noticeably quieter than usual. The anniversary recalls the nationwide demonstrations sparked by a controversial finance bill, during which protesters stormed parliament and security forces opened fire. Rights groups say more than 60 people were killed. This year's events were organized as memorial marches under the banner of Gen Z Liberation Day, with participants calling for accountability for those deaths and renewed police reform. Ahead of the anniversary, Interior Cabinet Secretary said the demonstrations had been formally notified to authorities and that the right to peaceful assembly would be respected. However, the scale of the security deployment and road restrictions underscored official concerns about maintaining order during the commemorations.
Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the region, and we head over to what's taking place in Iran, who has pushed back against US comments on the ceasefire deal, warning that disputes over inspections, sanctions, relief and regional security remain unsolved. Tehran says access to bombed nuclear sites will only be decided within the final framework of any agreement. Our correspondent Turah Shiradilu sent this update.
Iran's foreign ministry has condemned remarks by U.S. officials on the clauses and implementation of the ceasefire deal between Tehran and Washington. Without specifically naming officials, spokesman Ismail Baqai reacted strongly to statements over the inspection of Iran's bomb nuclear sites, control over the Strait of Hormuz, and unblocking of Tehran's frozen assets. He added that Iranian side predicted that the Americans' animosity would not end with the signing of an agreement. He also said it would not reduce Iran's suspicion because of broken promises in the past. In a separate post on X, Baqai slammed U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's remarks on Iran and the Lebanese anti-Israel group Hezbollah. Rubio said during his tour of the Persian Gulf that Lebanon is part of the talks with Iran only due to Tehran's support for Hezbollah. But Baqai said that no one will be fooled by such a rhetoric. He added that peace in the region cannot be achieved as long as U.S. militarism and interventionism continue. In another development, the Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs, Kazem Gharibabadi, has said that the Iranian delegation did not meet the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi in Switzerland as he requested. He rejected reports of Iran's agreement to have its nuclear sites that were bombed in Israeli-U.S. strikes inspected. He said access to nuclear facilities and their materials will only be decided within the final framework of the deal between Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, regional diplomacy continues. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has held the phone with his Saudi counterpart. According to official sources, he briefed Faisal bin Farhan on the latest negotiations with the United States. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Now, Pakistan says border trade with Iran will depend on the lifting of international sanctions under the recent US deal. And as those negotiations continue, Islamabad and Tehran are moving to strengthen border security and counter-terrorism cooperation. Our correspondent reports with more.
Pakistan is signaling its readiness to move forward on expanded trade ties with Iran, especially once international sanctions are lifted. But that depends on a final agreement between Tehran and Washington. Foreign Office spokesman in Islamabad, Tahir Hussain Andradi, said that the trade and economic projects with Iran could move forward. But sanctions relief is the key to unlocking broader cooperation. Pakistan is already preparing the infrastructure for expanded deals with Iran. The Federal Board of Revenue has designated a portion of the Taftan railway station as a land customs station. This is an upgrade for the country's main rail gateway to Iran. The move supports the two countries' long-standing goal of increasing the bilateral trade to $5 billion. However, sanctions, banking restrictions, and limited border infrastructure have kept the trade well below that target until now. Alongside economic planning, both countries are also engaged in closer coordination on security. With the recent de-escalation in regional tensions, the Pakistani and Iranian interior ministers have agreed to expand cooperation on counterterrorism, border security, cybersecurity, and immigration. For Pakistan, the strategy is twofold. Prepare for the commercial opportunities that could emerge if sanctions are eased, while also strengthening the security cooperation with a neighbor that shares nearly 900 kilometers of its border. Mariam Zia, A News.
Now to Turkey, and Ankara is preparing to welcome NATO leaders for one of the alliance's most closely watched summit next month. The meeting comes as Turkey seeks to project influence at a time of mounting regional and global pressure. The gathering will bring alliance leaders to Turkey at a sensitive moment for transatlantic security, with Ukraine, Russia defense spending and regional instability expected to dominate discussions. For Ankara, it's a diplomatic major stage. We now turn to Baku, and Azerbaijan's State Social Protection Fund has received the United Nations Public Service Award for its work on inclusive and equal social security services. Let's go to this report.
The State Social Protection Fund of Azerbaijan has received the United Nations Public Service Award. The fund was honoured in the category Delivering Inclusive and Equitable Services to Leave No One Behind for its initiative, Inclusive and Equal Social Security Services for All. The award was presented to Zaka Mirzayev, chair of the fund, during an official ceremony held in Tbilisi.
Protection Fund for Inclusive and Equal Social Security Services for All, Republic of Azerbaijan.
System by making it more inclusive, efficient, and transparent.
So, over the past 6 years, we have been implementing a comprehensive transformation in the sphere of social protection system in order to make our system more inclusive, more accessible, more attainable, and transparent and efficient. This transformation is reflected in our initiative that we have already presented to the United Nations Evaluation Committee for the United Nations Public Service Award, and it is yesterday, today, it is discussed here in panel sessions and workshops. For this award, as you know, that it is noted in this in the frame of this forum, it is the recognition of excellence in public services throughout the world.
The United Nations recognized the fund's reforms in social protection, including the proactive delivery of social benefits, its citizen-centred service model based on digital technologies, and its efforts to improve the accessibility, transparency and inclusiveness of social services. The United Nations Public Service Award is regarded as one of the most prestigious international honours in public administration and recognises excellence and innovation in public service delivery.
Now to a quick break, but when I return, I'll have a guest on the extreme heat wave that's taking over Europe. You do not want to miss it, so stay with me. Welcome back. We now turn to Western Europe, and as London Climate Action Week brings together global leaders, businesses and policymakers to accelerate climate solutions, it comes against the backdrop of an extreme heat wave sweeping across Europe, underscoring the growing urgency of the climate crisis. Joining me now is Dr. Nikki Hudson, Sustainability Leader, Bureau Veritas in London, to discuss what this moment means for climate action, resilience and the policies needed to respond to a warming world. Good morning and welcome to the programme.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today.
No problem. Well, my first question in all of this is, how did the heat wave change the tone of discussions? Did it shift focus on the long-term emission targets toward immediate questions or of adaptation, resilience and public safety? And is climate policy evolving?
I mean, the timing was impossible to ignore, as well as the impacts from the heat and also the impact on our human health. So while climate leaders were gathered in London for Climate Action Week, everybody who was attending or not attending were really experiencing a major heat wave in real time. I think it's brought to light questions around our resilience and our infrastructure and the need to adapt given the impacts on the severe heat. This was impacting our transportation. There were heat alerts, events got cancelled, the economy was disrupted. So at the back end of that, for instance, even in the City of London, there's now a plan which is going to be activated to focus on actually addressing that and making the city more resilient as a whole. And I think that echoes what many other cities and many other countries across Europe are actually going to be considering. So there's been an increased need to not just accelerate reducing our emissions, but also preparing for the impacts on our physical health.
Yes, definitely, because obviously you guys lived that out in real time. You couldn't deny the lived experience of going through such a heat wave, especially on, during Climate Action Week. I mean, the two just suddenly came together. It's so interesting that happened. And as you mentioned, a number of things are coming out of that. What was most significant about the time during Action Climate Week? I know that we had the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, really talk about the heat wave and saying that London was cooking. I mean, quite strong words and things needed to change. What was your view on all of that?
I think that he is, within that, it's described often as a silent climate risk because we don't normally experience we do during Climate Week now, much more around the floods and the storms. I think this week has really led to a dramatic change in our perceptions and also the concerns, particularly around the impact on our health services, as an example, the disproportionate risk for vulnerable people, children, elder generations, those who work outside. And I think that scenario and the need to be looking at policies much more around those aspects is coming much more to light, whereas previously we've very much focused on the NDCs, we've been focusing much more on the impacts overall on, accelerating finance as well, which is critically important, but to actually mobilise that. And I think those conversations are going to be really bringing this out further down the line.
Yes, and it just goes to prove the pace in that, because that's what I was going to touch upon, because with COP31 on the horizon as well, Climate Action Week is often viewed as a platform for shaping international momentum. And against the heatwave backdrop, I'm just thinking, did that now ignite a certain pace towards, the warming planet? And what were the key outtakes from that? Is anything going to be materialized beyond the conference?
I mean, every year I always hope so. I think the COP31 is going to, just listening from the conversations at the COP31 business leaders roundtable, for instance, there are practical thematics to help mobilize the private sector and bring them much more. So it's not just a policy COP focused on international players, but actually how do we bring the private sector now much more into the conversation with tangible actions, tangible action plans to actually start looking at the bigger picture and how to bring them into the loop. So I do feel that there is potentially, and don't hold me to it, I'm hopeful that there'll be a better communication between the private sector and the policymakers, particularly around how do we make our systems more resilient so our economies aren't going to be destabilized with the physical impacts of climate change, but also really bringing forth the impacts on health. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with also mobilizing different members of the community. There's a huge focus as well on women this year. So it'll be interesting to see how those voices also play out as well, particularly around some of the conversations when we look around schools and our health system as well, where typically we're normally more advocating change there. And I don't think the question is no longer about climate change. We have that every year. Yes, that is important. We can't deny the science. It's clearly impacting us all. It's impacting our infrastructure. But I think how we can start enabling to adapt quicker is really going to be central to this year. It has been during London Climate Action Weeks. We've not been able to ignore it. And the cost of inaction, if we keep this conversation so theoretical, I think we'll have some longer impacts, just from my personal view there.
Yes, and just on that, because it goes into my next question really, as to how much do these events actually produce meaningful change to meet climate goals? Because there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of, goal setting and different things like that that sound great on paper, but how that actually materializes is a completely different thing. And some may even say that it misses the deeper debates around fossil fuels, climate justice, accountability, just to name a few things. So what's your take on that, and how can it move into something more tangible?
So I find this very interesting. Each year I attend London Climate Action Week, and the same with the COP, because there is a business community forum. And it's not just business this year. It felt much more engaging. I was sat with for London, like with the City of London, when we were looking at decarbonising the built environment. And some of our partners, for instance, the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, the Loan Market Association, we were challenging what it actually takes to put together a standard which organizations can verify against to achieve net zero. And we've been holding ourselves accountable to keep those conversations going. So I think sometimes the practical implications on the ground and what other stakeholders are doing might not necessarily always translate through. I've always found myself normally attending discussions and roundtables where I get a lot more meaningful impact from, and where there are tangible actions which myself, my other partners, clients, colleagues in the business community can actually do something with. And I think the idea of partnerships and collaboration is becoming much more visible. And I hope that this will continue trickling through into COP31. If you just take events such as the Climate Innovation Forum, which normally gets held at both actually London Climate Action Week and the COPs, that really mobilizes not just what's happening at a policy level, what's happening in the science, but also those roundtables, those discussion points are tangible, but maybe we can all start holding ourselves a bit more accountable each time we do this, and actually put forward our desired outputs and impacts, which we can monitor 6 months down the line, to see how that can start mobilizing change, and we hold ourselves to report.
And what would you say, just very quickly, are the quick actions that can be taken either by governments, businesses or people in order to make sure that climate action is moved towards, as the word says, action and not just dormancy? Because there's so much chatter about it. Some people might not understand, okay, what can they do in order to move the conversation along? What can governments put in place, whether or not it's policy, whether or not it's certain legislation, to really kind of make sure that their country or countries around the world are all kind of sticking to this point of making sure that the warming does go down slowly?
I mean, we do have the NDCs which are in place, which are meant to help drive and mobilise to reduce our impacts of climate change. But I think the different work streams, and this was also echoed a little bit with planning for COP31, as I heard in the week, is start to communicate that clearly, but also simply. So our government's talking the same languages of what, say, a hospital or a school would understand versus what a consultancy would understand, what a pharmaceutical would understand. So I think simplifying that language is key. I think the next part in which we could do is actually setting out, and not to make this a reporting burden, but if there are those work streams set out in which the business and the public community can get involved together, it's what is that action which is going to help lead it, whether that is ensuring that you're reducing food waste, as one example, and that goes to the right vulnerable populations. How do you define that? But potentially also bringing in the finance community a lot more. You know, I've worked years on financing frameworks, and that's always a collaborative process. But within those, the definitions are very simple, they're very clear, whether it's social or environmental KPIs, which have to be mobilised and actioned. And I think creating a very simple framework in which people can operate in and then report on, so that data goes somewhere, it will be a huge task in itself. But I think we can all say, actually, this is what we know we need to be contributing towards outside of what we have to report on from a regulatory perspective.
Yes.
But the parts in which we can do to start changing it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Ms. Hudson, for coming onto the programme and explaining that. It's, as you mentioned, it's such a crucial time that the whole of Europe is very much under sweltering heat. Yeah. So it's really important to really highlight the Climate Action Week and what certain outtakes of that is taking place to kind of subside this. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
It's now time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me. Hello, you're watching Daybreak Live on A News, and I'm your host, Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Venezuela earthquake toll rises to 235 as rescuers race to find survivors under building rubble. Tehran strikes ship in the Strait of Hormuz as countries continue to try and reopen the oil route. And the UK records its hottest ever June day as health emergencies surge in Europe. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the BBC website, where it's also talking about the heat wave across Europe, because Paris has restricted alcohol consumption and sales as Europe's heat wave shifts east. Now we know that throughout the course of since Monday, Western Europe has been experiencing very high temperatures, and recently the UK and Switzerland have recorded the hottest ever June temperatures, which happened on Thursday. A toddler was also unfortunately died in France due to extreme heat when it got trapped inside a family car. Now the UK's new provisional high rate of 36.4 Celsius was recorded in Somerset, which actually surpassed June's record of 36.1 Celsius in Hampshire. And in Switzerland, the National Weather Agency said temperatures had exceeded 37 Celsius for the first time in June, breaking a record set in 1947. Now, earlier on Thursday, the Met Office, which is the UK's Weather and Climate Service, said a sweltering night in Cardiff broke another heat record for the country. Now, the scorching temperatures have stretched way across much of Western Europe, and now with at least 101 million people expected to experience temperatures above 35 Celsius. Now in France, where there are 3/4 of the country remained under an extreme heat alert, the National Weather Agency registered the hottest night since records began in 1947. And now at least 40 people in France, many of them young people, have drowned while swimming in unsupervised areas in order to cool themselves off. So French authorities are now making sure that people stay safe. And not only that, they've now announced public alcohol consumption and sales bans in Paris in an ease to actually basically ease pressure on the capital's hospitals during the heat wave, as you can see from some of these pictures that were coming onto the screen. Now, heat wave conditions have left Spain, the UK, France sweltering for days and are set to now shift over slightly into East Europe, with forecasters in Germany and the Czech Republic warning of extreme conditions taking place in those countries. Temperatures in Germany could actually hit 40 Celsius across the country on Friday, and Germany's national rail operator is allowing passengers to cancel trips because of the heat. Now, an extreme weather warning is now in place in much of the Czech Republic, as well as many other countries taking the same precautions due to the high temperatures that is due to the heat wave that has spread across Europe. And if we scroll down a little bit more, you'll be able to see this map. And red, obviously, with anything does signal that it's quite bad, and it is because of the temperatures reaching over 35 Celsius and sometimes still being quite high in the 30s during the evening, which is making it very hard for many individuals to sleep. But this map kind of shows Western Europe and the key areas that is being hit, France being one of them, as well as Spain, as you know, the UK, which we just had an expert talk to us about that, and then moving slowly into Eastern Europe, which is Germany, the Czech Republic, as well as a number of other countries. But we will keep you updated in relation to all that is happening there. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on the A News website, our website, where it talks about what's going on in the Middle East because UN halts Strait of Hormuz escort operations after reported attack on cargo ship. Well, the UN's International Maritime Organization, the IMO, has paused the planned evacuation of more than 11,000 sailors stranded on the strait after a cargo ship passed through the waterway and was attacked. Now, IMO chief had said several boats had already been evacuated, but the agency wanted to ensure that necessary safety guarantees would continue to be in place. Now, US officials say that Iran had fired on the ship, according to US media reports, and hundreds of ships and thousands of sailors have been stranded in the Gulf since February because of the US-Israel war against Iran. Now, the UN evacuation efforts was only announced on Tuesday following the reopening of the strait, and a large-scale operation is now underway in order to get sailors and a number of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. But that's what we know at the moment. Any further updates we'll provide you with later on during the course of the day. But that's the information for now. Okay, now let's move over to the New York Times, and that's on what is on everywhere right now in relation to what's happened in Venezuela by two back-to-back earthquakes that has hit the country. And the title for the New York Times is showing "Search for Venezuela Quake Survivors Grows More Urgent." If we scroll down, you'll be able to see some more pictures, but we know that the death toll is likely to rise. Currently, 235 people have been killed by this earthquake after two earthquakes struck Venezuela within seconds of each other, and there was damage to homes, buildings, and several parts of the country. Now, this happened, the earthquake, with a magnitude of 7.2 struck on Wednesday evening around 6:04 local time, which would have been 1 in the morning Baku time on Thursday, and in a town of the west of the capital in Caracas. As you can see, damage to that building, people standing back. Now, the second 7.5 magnitude quake hit a similar location just 38 seconds later, making destruction even more severe, and rescuers have been searching through the rubble in a rush to save lives. As you can see, the devastation and destruction that these earthquakes have caused due to the video that you can see on your screens now. Many more people are feared dead, with others left homeless or too afraid to stay home because of the damage and the unsafe buildings. They've decided to sleep in the streets and outside because they felt that was safer. And just to add, that it was actually a national holiday in Venezuela on the Wednesday, which meant that more people would have stayed home than a normal work day. And also, both earthquakes were quite shallow, which also means that there is more destruction because it's more to the surface than it is deeper down based on where normally earthquakes is reported, the surface is a bit further down instead of it being a shallow earthquake. So we do know that this has caused quite a number of devastation and lives have been lost. But also on top of this, rescue efforts have been underway, and a number of countries have pledged to give to Venezuela as well as provide search and rescue teams to help them find survivors. But let's now move over to our report that provides more information and more detail into this story. Let's take a look.
Rescue teams in Venezuela are searching for survivors after a powerful pair of earthquakes left more than 200 people trapped beneath collapsed buildings, according to officials. Emergency crews worked through rubble in Caracas and nearby regions on Thursday, as thousands remained missing and families waited for news. The quakes, measuring magnitude 7.2 and 7.5, struck west of the capital on Wednesday evening, with the second hitting less than a minute after the first, according to the US Geological Survey.
Buildings started to crack and things began falling apart everywhere. Everyone was frightened and nervous. It was the first time this had happened. I am in my apartment upstairs. Everything is destroyed. Everything is broken. Everything is cracked. I had to sleep in my son's car because we can't go back upstairs. My son, my son-in-law, my grandson and I slept in the car. We spent the night here and are still here because we can't go back up. We don't know what might happen if it happens again.
More than 1,500 people have been injured, with thousands still unaccounted for. Rescue workers are continuing to clear debris and reach survivors believed to be trapped under collapsed buildings. Entire neighborhoods in Caracas, La Guaira, and surrounding areas have been destroyed, forcing mass evacuations and leaving many homeless. International aid is being mobilized, with the United States deploying search and rescue teams and medical support. The United Nations is coordinating the global response, while Colombia, Mexico, Spain, Cuba, and Panama are sending teams and supplies. The European Union, China, Iran, and the Vatican have also pledged assistance. The US Secretary of State said rescue operations are underway, and a clearer assessment of the damage is expected within 48 hours.
We're already deploying search and rescue teams from Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles. There'll be some others we'll add. That's their most immediate need right now, is search and rescue efforts. They have a much of collapsed buildings, and so they'll need a lot of help in terms of digging through that. The airport there is badly damaged, so we'll have to rely on the Department of War to deploy assets there. And then we're also helping them with some overhead imagery, especially in coastal areas where they don't have full visibility over what the damage has been and what the impact has been. Those are the acute, like short-term needs over the next 48 to 72 hours, because in search and rescue, you're trying to get to people while you can still save their lives. They're buried under rubble.
Search and rescue operations continue as crews race against time to find survivors.
Alongside this, Starlink, the satellite internet unit of Elon Musk's SpaceX, said it will provide free services to its users in Venezuela for a month after 2 earthquakes hit the country, damaging its power and telecommunications infrastructure. According to the company, existing active customers impacted in areas will automatically receive a credit on their accounts, and those who previously cancelled their service will also receive credits, allowing them to reactivate their connections. The company also said customers whose Starlink equipment was damaged by the earthquakes can request a free replacement kit. Now to the Middle East, and maritime tensions are escalating in the Gulf following an attack on a commercial vessel near the Strait of Hormuz. The incident has prompted the suspension of an international escort operation, raising fresh concerns over the security of one of the world's busiest shipping routes.
The UN International Maritime Organization paused its operation to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday, following an attack on a vessel in the Gulf of Oman. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre had earlier said a cargo vessel was hit by an unknown projectile off Oman, causing damage to the ship's bridge. No casualties or environmental damage were reported. Reuters sources identified the ship as the Singapore-flagged Ever Lovely, while a security source said it was likely targeted by a drone. 2 US officials also told Reuters that Iran had fired on the ship, while Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority said vessels outside routes it has set will not be guaranteed safe passage. Secretary-General Arsenio Dominguez said to ensure coordinated approach and navigational safety, the IMO evacuation plan will be paused until further notice. The decision came hours after the IMO and Oman announced an evacuation plan for more than 11,000 seafarers stranded in the region amid heightened tensions and maritime security concerns. The IMO was helping to get hundreds of stranded ships and thousands of seafarers out of the strait, where they had been stranded for months since the start of the war in late February. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington and its Gulf allies are opposed to any Iranian fees or restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz, following a meeting with Gulf Cooperation Council countries in Bahrain.
Israel and Lebanon have rejected claims that Israeli forces withdrew from parts of southern Lebanon despite a US official saying that troops had pulled back from sections of a buffer zone. The remarks come in the middle of US-mediated talks on a phased arrangement that could see territory in the south handed over to the Lebanese army. A US State Department official described the reported move as a good faith step, saying Lebanese forces should move in to secure the area and dismantle militant infrastructure. But Israeli officials denied any withdrawal, saying military positions in the buffer zone remain unchanged. Staying on this topic, France and Italy will spearhead a new multinational coalition to support Lebanon after the UN peacemaking mission ends later this year. Speaking after talks in Antibes, President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced the joint initiative is designed to bolster Lebanese sovereignty and directly strengthen the country's armed forces. The leaders are also propose convening an international transition conference coordinated with the European Union and the United Nations. The UK is in the grip of a severe heat wave as temperatures hit record-breaking levels. The extreme heat is disrupting hospitals, schools and emergency services, while red weather warnings remain in place. Authorities warn of ongoing risks to health and safety. Our correspondent Zainab Faridza has more.
The UK has recorded its hottest June day on record, with temperatures reaching 36.4 degrees in Somerset, as a heat wave continues to affect millions across England and Wales. It is the second consecutive day the June temperature record has been broken after 36.1 degree was recorded in Hampshire on Tuesday. The extreme conditions are placing increasing pressure on public services. At least 6 NHS trusts in England have declared critical incidents with heat affecting IT systems, cancer treatment equipment, laboratory testing and medical scanners. The London Ambulance Service says it received almost 8,000 calls on Wednesday, including 642 life-threatening emergencies, with crews attending nearly 3,600 patients. Red weather warnings for extreme heat remain in place until Friday evening. The Met Office warns the conditions could have widespread impacts on health and pose a risk to life. The heat wave is also disrupting education, with around 2,400 schools in England and Wales experiencing closures or disruption this week. Water supplies are also under pressure. South East Water has imposed a housepipe ban across Kent, affecting around 850,000 customers as demand reached record levels. The company says water is being used faster than it can be treated and refilled, and that supplies must be protected for essential use such as drinking, cooking and hygiene. Forecasters say temperatures will remain exceptionally high until Friday before cooler conditions arrive over the weekend. Zena Farisada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now over to Turkey, and Ankara is preparing to welcome NATO leaders for one of the alliance's most closely watched summits next month. The meeting comes as Turkey seeks to project influence at a time of mounting regional and global pressure. The gathering will bring alliance leaders to the country at a sensitive moment for transatlantic security, with Ukraine, Russia defense spending and regional instability all expected to dominate discussions. For Ankara, it is a major diplomatic stage. And NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says tens of billions of dollars in new defense-related contracts are expected to be announced at the alliance's upcoming summit in Ankara. Speaking at the Atlantic Council, Rutte said the deals would mark a significant boost to NATO defense cooperation. Here's more.
Spurred by President Trump's leadership, we see household names like Lockheed, RTX, Northrop Grumman, Boeing and General Dynamics massively ramping up their production to meet this moment. We also see newer firms like Anduril, Palantir and Divergent Technologies innovating on tech and production methods at pace and with purpose. That is revolution. Bottom line, the prospects are plentiful. And in Ankara we will provide a platform to showcase how we are seizing the opportunities and making this revolution a reality. We will announce tens of billions of dollars of new contracts. And when our industries from Arlington to Ankara combine their strengths and step up supply, the result is not only improved security. We are in the early stages of a defense industrial revolution that will help grow our economies and support hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic.
Staying on this and joining me now is Chingez Mammadov, research alumni at the Ned and Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Baku. Now, at a time when NATO's credibility is increasingly questioned, we are now going to discuss this with this special guest. Welcome to the program today.
Good morning, Nadia. Thanks for the invitation. Very nice to be with you again.
Good to be with you. Well, just based on NATO now coming to the South Caucasus and the information around that, how important does the alliance remain as a stabilizing force in regional affairs?
NATO, in general, NATO is a very important player in the world, including in the South Caucasus and Central Asia. And I think right now there are two dimensions to this. First, there is a summit of NATO expected in Ankara, but secondly, importance of South Caucasus for NATO and NATO countries overall. Of course, they are interconnected to each other, but I think we still may consider them as separate issues. Because Azerbaijan represents importance for NATO for several reasons. First of all, after the restored sovereignty and also increased geography, because Azerbaijan previously during 30 years didn't control Karabakh. Now with controlling Karabakh, Azerbaijan exerts bigger influence also on routes in the South Caucasus. Plus, Azerbaijan pursued balancing policy, I mean balancing between different players, including NATO, Russia, Iran. Now with restored sovereignty, Azerbaijan has bigger leverages and better position to project itself in the region. And therefore, I think NATO is also interested in bigger cooperation with Azerbaijan. And therefore, visit of Mr. Kevin Hamilton, special representative of NATO for South Caucasus and for Central Asia. I think discussion will be around bigger cooperation between Azerbaijan and NATO. Plus, Azerbaijan is an important partner for Turkey. And we see that with new administration in the United States, President of the United States now pays more attention to Turkey, unlike of previous administration, Biden administration. Trump understands that, especially in current situation with European countries, Turkey will be bigger, let's say, player not only in the Middle East but also in the Caucasus as well.
And just on that, sorry, I don't want to. I'm just going to interrupt you very briefly because you've given me so much information, as you always do. It's always great to have you on. But I just wanted to add what you've just said in that, especially when it comes to the US, because President Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump's forthcoming attendance at NATO summit in Ankara, and the particular emphasis that places on Turkey, does it now occupy an even more central position within NATO's regional posture, would you say?
Yes, I agree with you. Turkey plays already and will play bigger role in the events in the region overall. And we see that there are also issues related to USA-Iran war with involvement of Israel. And Turkey's geography extending, from the Mediterranean area to the Middle East to the South Caucasus, plus through the organization of Turkic states, it projects also its influence to Central Asia. I think the strategists in the United States, especially in the administration of Trump, realize that. Not surprisingly, now United States seemingly avoids the previous decision about supplying F-35 to Turkey, and also certain engines to Turkish-made planes. That's why I think, yes, Turkey will play a bigger role, and especially in view of relations between the United States and Europe.
Yes.
The United States needs Turkey also to influence Europe, to pressure Europe for bigger investments into security, plus kind of more unanimous voice, because currently, seemingly, Europe, kind of different countries within NATO have different strategic interests. And that's why Rutte, I think, concentrated his speech on kind of united voice for in Europe.
Yes, and just quickly, Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have their own allied framework. To what extent does this provide Azerbaijan with a NATO-adjacent security guarantee, given Turkey's position as a NATO member? Or should this be more understood strictly as a bilateral position between Azerbaijan and Turkish arrangement rather than an extension to NATO protection?
As we know, Azerbaijan doesn't seek membership in NATO, but Azerbaijan is closest ally of Turkey. There is strategic partnership, especially in military area. So in this regard, I think Azerbaijan can benefit from NATO, but also NATO benefit from Azerbaijan, because NATO is looking, for example, not only for military cooperation, but many NATO countries are interested in energy security. And from this point of view, Azerbaijan represents very important, as an important player for NATO countries. Plus, cooperation with Turkey increases also influence of NATO to the South Caucasus, plus to Asia. I think NATO's main interest in the South Caucasus is stability. That's why I think NATO will pursue policy of partnership both with Azerbaijan, but Armenia. We know that there is close cooperation between Armenia and NATO. I don't think that Armenia will become member of NATO either, but cooperation continues. And there were recently military exercises conducted between NATO and Armenia. And if previously only United States participated, this time Canada also joined military trainings. I think NATO tries to keep balance in the South Caucasus. And I think military exercises in Armenia served exactly this role.
I see.
Not to allow, let's say, connectivity between Turkey and Azerbaijan play a bigger role. Yeah. I think this is the reason.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mammadov, for coming onto the program and explaining that. We'll definitely be paying very close attention as it all kicks off next month. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting.
You're now watching Daybreak. Now to a short break, and when I return, I have more news for you. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and as you can see from behind me, we are now going to discuss the FIFA World Cup, which has delivered another week of drama, with the group stage producing standout performances, surprise results, and several teams securing their places in the knockout rounds going through. So let's take a look at the key results from today over the course of this morning. Now we go to the results, which is Curaçao, which scored 0-1 to Ivory Coast, so 1-0 to Ivory Coast. Then we go to Ecuador 2-1 over Germany. Ecuador played Germany, then Japan and Sweden drew with 1-1. The Netherlands got 3-1 over Tunisia, and Turkey actually scored 3-2 to the USA, so won that particular round. And Paraguay drew with Australia 0-0. Thank you so much for joining me today. Those are all the stories for the morning, but please make sure you stay throughout the course of the day, where we'll provide you with more updates to the key stories taking place. And make sure you don't go anywhere over the weekend. We have so much more in store for you, and I'll be back on Monday with the latest headlines throughout the course of the day. Take care.